The night my husband whispered that I should stay in the back because I was just a housewife, I felt myself disappear in a room full of people. I stood there quietly, smiling the way women learn to smile when they're told they don't belong. Then the donor arrived, looked straight at me, pulled me into a hug, and said something that made the entire room fall silent. Have you ever been hidden by the person who was supposed to stand beside you, and wondered what would happen if the truth stepped into the light? The invitation had arrived 2 weeks earlier, embossed letters announcing a charity gala my husband insisted was important for his career, and from the moment he mentioned it, I could feel the distance between us stretch wider. He didn't ask what I wanted to wear or whether I was excited, only reminded me not to say much, not to embarrass him, and finally, on the night itself, as we stood in the hotel hallway adjusting his cufflinks, he said it plainly, almost casually, "You're just a housewife, it's better if you stay in the background." The words didn't sting right away, they settled, heavy and familiar, like something I'd been carrying for years without naming. I nodded because that's what I'd learned to do. After 15 years of marriage, nodding had become second nature. I used to be someone else once. Before the kids, before his promotions, before my days blurred into schedules and errands and quiet sacrifices that never made it onto a resume. I had a degree, opinions, a voice that used to come out easily. But somewhere along the way, being supportive turned into being invisible. The ballroom was bright with chandeliers and soft music, men in tailored suits and women who seemed to glide rather than walk. My husband moved ahead of me instinctively, greeting colleagues, laughing louder than usual, his hand never once reaching back for mine. I hovered near a column, clutching my small purse, watching him become the version of himself he liked best, confident, admired, unburdened by the domestic life he left at home. I told myself it was fine, that this was just one evening, but my chest felt tight, like I was holding my breath without realizing it. People passed by without seeing me, conversations flowing around me as if I were part of the decor. I thought about the countless dinners I'd cooked while he worked late, the weekends spent managing everything so he could rest, the quiet pride I'd felt when his success grew, believing we were building something together. Standing there, I wondered when "together" had started to mean apart. The speeches began, donors and executives praised for their generosity, applause rising and falling in polite waves. My husband joined a small group near the stage, his back half turned to me, and for a moment I considered slipping out, going home early, sparing myself the slow erosion of the night. Then there was a shift in the room, subtle but unmistakable, a ripple of attention moving toward the entrance. People straightened, voices lowered. The donor had arrived. I didn't know his face, only his name, spoken with a mix of respect and curiosity. He moved through the crowd without urgency, greeting people warmly, not performing, just present. When his eyes met mine, I assumed it was coincidence, another glance sliding past. But he stopped. He walked directly toward me, past my husband and the circle of executives, and before I could react, he smiled and wrapped me in a gentle, familiar hug. It was the kind of hug that doesn't rush, that reminds you of being seen. "I've been looking for you," he said softly, and I felt the room hold its breath. My husband froze, confusion flashing across his face, and I stood there stunned, the weight of years pressing against that simple human contact. The donor pulled back slightly, still holding my hands, and asked how I was, genuinely, as if my answer mattered. I managed a nod, my throat too tight for words. People stared, curiosity sharpening into something else, and my husband finally stepped forward, his smile strained, introducing himself again, as if reclaiming control of the moment. The donor listened politely, then looked back at me and said, "I never married, but if I had, I would have wanted someone like you beside me." The sentence landed quietly, without drama, but it shifted something fundamental in me. I wasn't sure what he meant or how he knew me at all, only that in that instant, the role I'd been assigned cracked open. My husband laughed awkwardly, brushing it off as a compliment meant for the evening, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes, the sudden awareness that I was no longer invisible. As the donor moved on, leaving a trail of whispers behind him, I remained rooted to the spot, my heart pounding. Questions swirled, about why he'd sought me out, about what my husband truly saw when he looked at me, about how easily I'd accepted being hidden. I realized then that the night wasn't about the gala or the donation or even the humiliation I'd felt earlier. It was about the moment someone else reflected back a version of me I'd almost forgotten existed. And as I watched my husband try to recover his composure, I wondered what this unexpected recognition would cost us, and whether I was finally ready to find out. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, my husband suddenly attentive in a way that felt rehearsed, his hand resting on my back as if to signal ownership rather than affection. I felt strangely detached, observing him the way you observe a stranger whose habits you know too well. On the drive home, he laughed it off, saying the donor must have mistaken me for someone else, that these wealthy men like to play charming roles. I didn't argue. I stared out the window, replaying the hug, the steady warmth of it, the way the donor had looked at me without expectation. The next morning, my phone rang while my husband was in the shower. An unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something told me not to. The donor introduced himself, his voice calm, unassuming. He said he hoped he wasn't overstepping, that he'd recognized me from years ago, from a small community project I'd volunteered for before my marriage had narrowed my world. I barely remembered it myself, a time when I believed small efforts mattered. He said my work back then had stayed with him, not because it was grand, but because it was sincere. We spoke for 10 minutes. That was all. He didn't flirt, didn't pry. He thanked me for reminding him why he gave his money away in the first place. When the call ended, I sat at the kitchen table shaking, not from fear, but from the sudden realization that my life had been larger than I'd allowed it to be. My husband's reaction was immediate and sharp when he found out. He accused me of seeking attention, of embarrassing him, of forgetting my place. The word housewife came up again, this time edged with anger. Something in me finally resisted. I told him, quietly, that being a housewife didn't mean being small, and that hiding me said more about his insecurity than my worth. He scoffed, dismissed it as a phase, but the distance between us solidified into something real. Over the following weeks, opportunities appeared, not because the donor intervened directly, but because he reconnected me with people, ideas, a sense of capability. I began volunteering again, slowly, reclaiming pieces of myself without asking permission. My husband grew resentful, then cold. We talked late into the nights, conversations circling the same truths we'd avoided for years. He wanted the version of me that stayed quiet and supportive. I wanted a life where I could stand in the light without apology. There was no dramatic breakup, no single moment that ended everything. Just a mutual understanding that love without respect isn't sustainable. When we decided to separate, it was painful, but also strangely peaceful. Months later, I ran into the donor at a small event, this time by choice, not accident. He smiled, asked how I was doing, listened as I spoke about my new work, my tentative plans. There was no promise of rescue, no grand gesture. Just acknowledgement. As I drove home that night, alone but not lonely, I thought about the woman I'd been in the ballroom, pressed against a column, waiting to be overlooked. I understood now that being hidden had never truly been my husband's doing alone. I had participated in my own erasure, believing it was the price of stability. The donor hadn't saved me. He had simply reflected back a truth I was ready to accept. That my value wasn't conditional on anyone's title or approval. That I could step forward, even after years of standing back, and build something new on my own terms.